Are those reading glasses?
Yes. This is what 48 means.
Oh my God.
I am 100% sure you're wearing lenses. Welcome back to the Lighthouse Conversations, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs and tastemakers from the worlds of arts and culture, tech, and of course, food. I'm your host, Hashem and Ashraf. If you're tuning in for the first time, make sure you hit the follow button in your podcast app to get alerted when we have new episodes. You can listen to our extensive catalog of episodes in the app or on our website at thelighthouse.ae/podcast. My guest today is Ashraf Hebela, who is currently head of startup banking at Silicon Valley Bank, but also someone I met many years ago while we were both college students at Harvard University. Our conversation covers many aspects of his life: his experience growing up as an Egyptian American in New Jersey, the venture capital world he interacts with daily as a tech banker, and his views on what might be in store over the next few years in tech and venture capital. I had to remind Ashraf that I haven't forgotten how well or not so well he performed in all the classes we took together. Mr. Ashraf, good morning from Dubai. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this episode since I've asked you to come on. I think you and I met, should I reveal how long ago that's been? It's somewhere between 25 and 30 years at this stage. Let's just put it that way, because I met you as a freshman at Harvard. In fact, freshman week, we met both with our parents, and I'm just going to recite the story for the audience because I think it's a little bit of fun. Let's just say, and I'm saying it in a very nice way, neither of us took an immediate liking to the other. That
is true. We came from very different worlds. But it's actually kind of amazing that even though I found you when I first met you to be a bit alien-like for my own predilections, there was also a subtle affinity that I didn't want to admit, and I think it's pretty obvious what that was.
Thank you. I think the feeling was mutual. To be honest, I had the same thing, and that speaks a lot also about 18, 19-year-olds that are a little insecure, that really were going to a new place. And I think at the time, used to their comfort zone. And I think, interestingly enough, neither of us was the comfort zone of the other. I mean, I grew up in Cairo. Both of us have Egyptian parents. You grew up in the States, in New Jersey. So we've had, at that point, our parents had different paths, but you could see that the values they had when they met, which was, I found the interesting part, very, very similar. So they got along just fine. You and I were suspicious of each other because neither of us knew that type of specimen.
So, what's really, really strange, Hashem, is we didn't rehearse this. And that's exactly what I was going to say back to you, is the thing I remember the most and the thing that gave me the comfort was seeing how my father and your father interacted. Specifically, I remember that engagement. And it was so fluid. Yeah. And there was a sort of familiarity that instantly told me that this was wasn't a safe place, but it felt like home. And it started with the parents. It really did. Now, obviously, there was a nice affinity that your dad also got a degree somewhere in New Jersey. That helped. Helped the conversation. But honestly, that was really the thing that made it take off, I think.
No, I agree with you. And at the end of the day, I think as Egyptian parents or as any parents, both of them were looking for the same thing for their children. And, we're both the second of two siblings. I have an older sister, you have an older brother. So let's start there. I mean, give us a bit of a sense of growing up in the US as an Egyptian American in New Jersey in a predominantly Arab neighborhood. I mean, I've come and visited you many times. How was that for you?
Yeah, it changed. I would say you started seeing much more of an Arab presence sort of at the time I had left to college. It was predominantly an Italian Catholic neighborhood. I give my parents a lot of credit. It wasn't easy to come to a location like I grew up in North Bergen, New Jersey, near the Hudson River, and to do that as one of the first true, like I would say, immigrants in that neighborhood wasn't easy. And I think I give a lot of credit to my dad. Never saw himself as an Egyptian in that neighborhood as much as I think he carried and comported our family with with pride and ethnicity. He was a Yankees fan.
Yeah.
He watched
No,
the
I
Yankees
remember. It was
games every
fascinating to
weekend.
me. Yeah.
He didn't feel like American culture was something that he had to find.
Yeah.
It was something that he felt he could own too. And that authenticity, I think, in many ways endeared him to the culture of the neighborhood and made it easy for us to assimilate.
Yet the values both your parents have and had, frankly, and I've met them many times, and you were kind enough and generous enough to invite me to your house many times over Thanksgiving and other holidays when I had nowhere to go, frankly. Their value system didn't change. So it's so interesting. They kind of, especially I think your dad, you're right, kind of very easily fit into kind of a more Americanized culture. But they had a Mendrog value system that was very clear. And that, to me, was always, and when I came to see you, they made it very clear what they expect of us.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, look, my mom and dad gave my brother and me the leeway to be who we wanted to be in a country that was ours. But look, there was a sense of excellence that they instilled in us that included our culture, our heritage, our language, our religion, and they didn't compromise that. So on the weekends, I would spend half of my weekends with some of my Italian Catholic friends in what they have a version of sort of school called CCD. It's catechism, and I'd go and learn about Catholicism with them. And then the next day I would go and go to Jersey City, which is a neighboring town, and learn Arabic and Quran and Tajweed and Tilawa. And it was their way of saying, like, look, like, there is a sense of excellence that we need to instill in you. And that includes understanding your culture, religion, your heritage, and your language.
And did you feel, I mean, this was way pre 9/11, things changed in the States for a while, and then they changed again, frankly. But let's just go back to, did you or your brother feel, that you were sticking out because of the fact that you were Arab or the fact that you were Muslim, especially in a predominantly kind of Christian Catholic neighborhood?
Very rarely. I mean, there were always, there's always going to be that one or two incidences that you remember and that probably sort of are ingrained in these moments that you'll probably never forget. But in general, no. I mean, I think it really started from a foundation really that I'd say my dad owned, which was, and it's funny, I just use it as an example. It's just the Yankees weren't the American white males team. It was his team. It was a team he followed at 7 p.m. And so that was something I think we carried with us. My best friends were Italian and German. They were just average American middle-class kids. If I happened to find an Arab and I had Arabic friends in the neighborhood, it was because I thought that they were really cool and I liked to hang out with them. But there wasn't this sense of segregation between these are the ones I really want you to know, and here are the ones that you could know, but only if you have time. It was very organic, and we got to live our own lives.
And within that, you alluded a little bit about your parents' sort of sense of excellence, which is a very good way of putting it. Was that kind of, I don't want to use the first force because it's not force, but was that kind of, was that coming from them? You hear a lot of these sort of, today, the kind of stereotypical immigrant stories, parents come, want the best for their kids, push them really hard. The kids kind of begrudgingly tag along, or was that something you had from the beginning? You were like, well, whatever I do, because when I met you, that's what I felt. You were very good at it and it came easy to you.
Yeah. It's a good question, Hashem. I go back and I think my brother bore the blunt of being the first generation and the eldest son. Yeah. So there was a level of pressure he had on him because I don't know if I've ever told you that, but when Nandita came, my brother is named Nandita. When he came to the States, he actually spent the first, I think, year or two of his life, or I don't know, 2 or 3 years of his life in Alexandria with my grandmother and my uncle on my mother's side, because my parents needed to just have a job. They needed to they just needed to hustle.
Get their act together first.
My dad was getting his master's degree in accounting. My mom was essentially funding the household with her nursing degree, working in New York. There was no time to raise two kids, well, one kid at the time. And so he was in Alexandria. He came not knowing much English, and he had a little bit of flack when he came here with a bunch of American kids, and they'd never seen a foreigner, especially when living next door. And, so there was a lot of pressure on him from my parents, like know English and learn. And so they really got on him, and it's no fault of their own. They just didn't know the system. I attribute a lot of where I ended up to my brother. I mean, part of it is I just kind of coasted through it. I consider him the smarter of the two of us. And I got to just sort of coast through his good habits. And I always just had a good role model with him. And that honestly was, I would say, the disproportionate reason why I kind of ended up where I was.
Your brother listens to the podcast. I didn't tell him we're doing this so that it'll be, I don't know, a surprise for him.
Oh, I told him.
Oh,
I just got off the phone. Dude, he listens. He loves it. He loves your podcast.
So sweet.
I mean, it seems like it has a really good following, man.
Yeah, it does. It does. And what's actually interesting, which is not the only reason I asked you to do this, and I appreciate it, but we have a lot of people in the States, and I don't know if those are like, it has to obviously be somebody interested in the region, right? So I don't know, but it's interesting.
I don't know, man. I don't listen to it because of sheer interest in the region at all. I listen to it because there are aspects of the beat of and sort of the ingredients that you put together for the podcast that's highly unusual and very differentiated. I mean, I do. And so it's like, it's the Middle East, but like you're an English speaking, like Harvard educated, guy who's looking at the crossroads of culture, F&B and technology that crosses the chasm of geography, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. And now I feel a lot better about myself. I think you and I, at the time before Basil came, were the only two Egyptians or of Egyptian origin at Harvard, which sounds like nothing, but I think meant something to us. And Egypt meant different things to different people. Obviously, I'm curious to hear your version. What did it mean to you then? And what does it mean to you now?
It's so amazing, right? Like, what do they say? What was the Sound and Light show, right? I know that's very cliche to say, but it was a really profound, and I don't know who they quote, but it's one of my favorite things to go back and hear is when they say like, man fears time, but time fears the pyramid. There's something sort of, and I'm going to stress on time. I think there's something about time that's just so powerful. And I think when I think about what my heritage means to me, it's changed over the years. As a young kid, it meant something so different than being a college kid. And it means something completely different today. Just
give us a sketch. Let's use college because we're at that point. Just a sketch of what it meant then, and then maybe we'll fast forward to today. I just want to give a sense of proportion here. Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I was studying it, right? I was going to school and I was learning Arabic. It was a lot of rote. And so my relationship to it felt highly academic, somewhat clinical, somewhat tiresome. I always appreciated it, but there was a lot of effort to sort of get to know it. And so it felt like a little bit of homework. And I think as I got to college and I got to, I'd say, experience other Egyptians of my, I guess, folks that I could connect with that were of my predilection that were going through a shared experience, it changed. It became home. Ironically enough, it was like I was in Cambridge, far away from New Jersey. And the thing that made me feel at home were my other Egyptian friends. And so all of a sudden, it didn't feel like home was so far away. I never really felt homesick. And then as I'm getting older, interestingly enough, it's now a part of the capacity of, it's interesting. Is that, as you're younger, you think about the future. And as you get older, you think, what you become whole by thinking about your past and the richness of your past. And so your past becomes just as powerful as the future, I think, as you age. And for me, it's become a part of what makes me whole because I have such rich, profound experiences and appreciation and memories of my culture and my time at home with my parents who are Egyptian and speaking Egyptian at home. That past becomes a big part of your fuel as you get older. And when you're a parent now, so that is also a big change. your wife is not Arab. How do you now look at this in terms of giving your kids some context? I mean, I struggle with it, and I live in Dubai, and but I'm also not married to an Egyptian. I'm married to a Saudi, but obviously closer culturally potentially. But how do you now think about that when you talk to your kids? How do you position it?
It's harder. This has been a struggle for me. I'll be really honest.
Of course.
I wouldn't regret for a minute, how my life turned out. I'm very blessed. But I did have to make peace, Hashem, with the fact that I could kind of barely write. I could probably barely read it Ahram. I could kind of barely put it together myself. For me to carry the mantle and instill that in younger, essentially American children raised by an American mom was going to be Herculean. And so I had to honestly mourn my ability to do it. And some people might call that lazy. I got to pick my battles. I mean, life's hard, right?
It's a transformation. And I assure you, they will get something. It's going to be very different than you. I mean, I think we all have to make peace of that.
And that's a part of it, right? Is I think, look, they may and they may not. I'm trying to be more realistic about it, which is, I'm sure that the first generation Italians that came to America spoke generally more fluent Italian, probably had a better handle on Catholicism. I'm not saying all, I'm giving you the broad generalization. And over time, they assimilate. You carry a whole lot of guilt to be the first generation that lets it drop, if you will. I just had to come to a place where I said, I got to mourn it. I've raised incredible children. I've married a woman who, even my Egyptian mom would say, is probably the most patient, kindest, mom and woman that she's met in her life. Genuinely,
that's a high bar.
And that's a high bar.
That's a high bar.
And so there's something wonderful about saying, look, I'm not going to be able to pull this one off. They're not going to be fluent in Arabic. They're probably not going to know Ghazan the way I did when I was, 13, 14. But they'll have their own journey, to your point. When that's going to happen, I don't know. I'll give them the access and the privilege for it. Let's make sure we spend some time in Egypt when they get older. Let's make sure that we're spending time as a family. And then let's let the good fortune of life give us the upside. That's the part that's hard to do, is and not everything's in your control. And I'm talking about that just beyond just raising kids. I think it's part of it's just mourning that not everything's in your control, but also don't mourn it to the point that the rest of it's all downside. It's not life has its optimistic upside. Let the joy of the journey of letting that upside happen, and just be in the conversation so that when those opportunities happen, you can exploit them.
So you were in college, here you are in college, you're doing well. When was there an early formation of what you wanted to do with your life? In the sense of, I want to broadly be in this industry, or my ambition is X, or was it sort of I'm going to keep going and see where all of this takes me?
That was the part that was hard. I'll be honest. I mean, I was not, and I don't by any means disregard my academic or intellectual acumen by any means, just being clinical. But I wouldn't say that I was the smartest person at Harvard. It was an incredibly humbling place to be. And you kind of start getting into the sort of herd mindset of how it works in these elite schools. And so seeing people going and deciding that they need to absolutely get the job at McKinsey, get the job at Goldman Sachs, all the tier one names.
And that hasn't changed, by the way. That hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't changed. And by the way, it didn't change when I went to Stanford for business school. It was the same. It was the same sort of pressure. Yeah. And so I don't think I was fortunate enough to have the full strength not to go through that process. But interestingly enough, and I was an economics degree. I was an economics major, as you know, but it was sort of during that junior year when Netscape really took off on the college.
We had email, I think, our second year in college. Yeah, I want to make us sound ancient. We used to go to the Science Center to check the email.
That's right. There was that Turbo Gopher. It wasn't Netscape. It was Turbo Gopher. And I remember Turbo Gopher was the file sharing system that predated the sort of front end internet browsers. And I just remember seeing it and I was like, whoa. Like this stuff is foundational. This is a fundamental shift in the paradigm. I know I did economics.
So you were aware of it. That's so interesting.
Oh yeah. No, I was hooked on Turbo Gopher.
I want to tell you, it completely went over my head. So was that what made you eventually, and I'm fast forwarding here, but go to California? I mean, that's a big move, right? Your family's on the East Coast. You grew up there. Yeah. There's a comfort zone, all sorts of things. And I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, your brother, as you said, eventually wind up coming to the Middle East and now lives in Abu Dhabi. Yeah. But you went almost, the other way, right? Like I'm calling you right now and there's 11-hour difference. Mm-hmm. Was that, again, conscious given what you've just said, or was that sort of somewhat happenstance?
No, it was very much a conscious decision. It's like there's at the micro level, career-wise, up until, probably my 30s, I wasn't really sure, what I was doing. I was taking product management jobs and program management jobs, and all of them were incredibly interesting jobs in their own right. But I didn't have a career in mind. My macro roadmap is I knew I loved technology, but I also loved economics and finance. And I couldn't quite put it together on the micro side. But the wonderful thing is I never afraid to switch paths from those two macro desires. And I got to Stanford. I got a free ticket to go. And so I took, by the way, points from Anderson Consulting days. And I went to Palo Alto and I was on 280 and I saw the majesty of that landscape and it was over. Like, I was like, you know what, like something in my gut tells me I have to be here.
So after moving to California and finishing up at Stanford, Ashraf started out in enterprise software, going to work for one of the first CRM companies, Zeeble Systems, which was eventually sold to Oracle. This kicked off the next phase of his career, resulting in him joining Silicon Valley Bank in 2009. When we come back, we'll get Ashraf's thoughts on the startup world, both in and out of Silicon Valley. That's right after the short break. Welcome back. I'm Hashem Montasser, and you're listening to the Lighthouse Conversations with my guest, Ashraf Hebela. Do you think that Silicon Valley will be able to maintain its hold the way it has? We have now seen a lot of the Silicon Valley big VCs build outposts in New York. I'm going to just stay with the States for a second and not look at Europe and China, et cetera. Yeah. But we've seen people move to Los Angeles. We've seen big companies that have become unicorns and beyond, the Snaps of the world, also move to places like Los Angeles. It feels more dispersed. And you've also had COVID. So now you've had the work from home phenomena that's come in a lot of those companies. So there was a moment, I imagine, I have not lived there, I have not had the benefit of the experience you've had, but where I can imagine walking into a number of restaurants or coffee shops where you see everyone, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. I don't feel that's the case anymore. It's been dispersed and technology partially has made that happen. So there was a lot of strength in that network and that physical connectivity and proximity. What's your feeling on where this is heading?
Well, look, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball.
No, of course not. Your view.
There's a lot of really smart people that would take both sides of that are far smarter than me. I would tell you that I don't think Northern California, Silicon Valley gets usurped that easily. And we can go into the details. And I also think it's a little bit of a false choice. This idea of, well, if these areas like Miami and Austin and the DMV and the Midwest are growing, well, then by virtue of that, NorCal must be shrinking. That's a false narrative. In reality, the denominator has expanded.
The pie, yeah.
And that's the idea of what I was saying about that verticalization of technology has now been horizontalized. Everybody needs technology. And so when you look at, for example, the investor base, the capital that's being deployed into it, it isn't just the endowments, the standard endowments from universities or pensions. Now you got sovereign wealth funds. Now you have family offices. You got multifamily offices that are now durable capital. It's not fickle capital that it was 15, 20 years ago. You've got private equity that's coming in a big way. That capital allows that pie to grow significantly. Now, also look at the entrepreneurial side. It used to take you about $1 million, $1.5 million to start a company because you had to buy expensive servers. You had to own all the servers. There was no fractional cloud, hosting. So the cost of also starting the businesses has significantly declined with the advent of infrastructure technology, right? And so it's cheaper to build a company. There's more capital to deploy against those companies. The pie is getting bigger. The number of students that are graduating with comp sci degrees is increasing. I run our analytics group as well at the bank. And what we've seen in that data is Northern California has maintained, in aggregate, roughly maintained its market share of company formation and company investment.
Yeah, it's so interesting you're saying that. I kind of agree, because when I look at venture capital as a whole, people sometimes lose sight. It looks, because technology is always in the news, right? It looks like a very big industry. It really isn't compared to others. I mean, look at private equity. Look at the big players in venture capital today, the Andreessen Horowitzes of the world, which are perceived as giants, are actually quite small in comparison to the Blackstones and KKRs, who have attacked, many multiple industries, including real estate, etc. Now, what's interesting is all those crossover investors that you've seen coming in.
Yeah.
Do you think the last hit and the massive market declines that we've seen this year have taught them a lesson? You think everybody's going to stay in his lane for a little while? Or do you envisage going forward the Andreessen starting to do public ETFs, let's call it just staying in tech, and the tigers of the world coming further and further down into round CBA, which is what's been happening? So do you think this is going to all kind of coalesce into just larger funds that do everything? Or what's happened in the market of the last 5-6 months is going to bring us back to, let me stay in my lane. That's what I know, and that's what I'm going to stick to.
Great question. I'm actually seeing that private equity is learning a lot from venture capital, and venture capital is learning a lot from private equity. They're learning from each other, and I think they're both here to stay. So I think in the long run, the idea of private equity leaving I don't think that happens. I think that capital is here, and it goes back to the fact that this horizontal play in technology, everybody knows it's a fundamental part of the economy. Even corporate venture capital has been way more durable than it's ever been. They're not going away. Here's the other interesting thing, Hashem, is this is a wonderful thing for entrepreneurs. And this is one of the things I've been talking a lot with founders, which is I know, and I obviously love the venture model. Silicon Valley Bank loves that venture model. They've been amazing partners to us, and we continue to double down on the venture environment. But the wonderful thing is there's a panoply of capital that's out there for an entrepreneur to access. I think entrepreneurs need to also smarten up about how much variegated types of capital are available to them and which ones make the most sense. It isn't just that you have to go for private equity anymore, or that you have to go for debt, or that you have to go for venture capital. You can go directly to you can go with an emerging manager. You can go with the family office. You can go direct to a sovereign. You can go with private equity, not venture. You can go with venture, not private equity. There's very different aspects of that cap table with a very different board profile of who you put on there. So I do think it's incumbent on entrepreneurs to say, what do I want to build? Do I want to build a unicorn, or do I want to build a model that is going to be great, but it's looking for an M&A? Or do I want to build a business that's more of a $30 million, $50 million valuation? I'm good with that. That all defines who you want to get capital from.
So just to translate this a little bit to our audience here, Ashraf, this last point you made, which I think is a very important one. If I'm an entrepreneur today and I go direct, as you said, let's just say I go to Harvard Management Company, then I'm in Harvard University, and I ask them to directly fund me. I'm presuming here that one of the benefits are this is very patient, long-term capital. The second benefit is this is not a fund like an Andreessen or Sequoia or any of those funds. Nothing against those funds. I'm just saying that has their own respective LP group that is a finite period, typically, let's say 10 years, with the pressures that come with that. Now, the downside is the Sequoias and Andreessens and others presumably add a lot of value to that to that entrepreneur, because they've seen this Harvard management company. That's not their expertise. So just to make it very simple, if Hashem today starts a company, is it depending on the type of company I'm building, who I should access, or does it depend on me as a person? Like
both. I mean, it's both. I think it's fundamentally both. I think if you're looking to look, and this isn't, by the way, this isn't a ding on tier one venture capital.
No. There's no ding here.
If you're raising a $5 billion fund, and your LPs need, and you know that you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 companies that are going to make your fund at a multiple, you're going to have major home runs. You're going to have to knock the ball off that. You're going to have to knock the cover off that ball, right? And so by virtue of that, the incentive of those larger funds are going to say, I need you to be a unicorn. Like I can't settle with you being
the math doesn't add up otherwise.
The math doesn't add up. And so you as an entrepreneur need to say to yourself, do I want this thing to be a 5, 10, $50 billion valuation company, in which case I should go towards a financial model and an operating model that is built with an infrastructure that almost necessitates that. That's perfect alignment of capital and objective of entrepreneur. On the other hand, if my answer is look, I want to create, a $250 million exit, and I'd like to get folks that have a great network in financial services, that can help me operate and introduce me to really good financial services companies. You probably don't necessarily need to go with a $5 or $7 billion fund. You could probably go with a $250 million fund.
You've met a lot of entrepreneurs. You know a lot of entrepreneurs. You, as both personally and as SVB, have funded a whole ton of companies over the years, etc. When you look at those guys and girls, let's say, and someone says, as you said, now or my stated objective really is to build $100 million company and I'd like to sell it. Is your thought process, not ambitious enough? Or is your thought process, wow, he really knows what he's doing, he's realistic, versus the other one? And I'm going to give you now the contrast, the other guy who comes in or girl that comes in and says, I want to build the next unicorn. Are both needed, or are you looking at one or the other? Either one saying, of course, sounds ridiculous, it lacks ambition, because 100 million is does not necessarily lack ambition, but in the world of Silicon Valley with all these unicorns, maybe. So how are you looking at this? How are you evaluating the entrepreneurs? And I'm sorry, the follow-up question to this is, let's just talk generally about the kind of traits you like to see that give you comfort.
On your first question on ambition with, if you're going to sell it pre-unicorn status, I did an analysis with the team, I don't know, 6 years ago when I was really deep in the analytics side of the business, and I was sort of doing the dirty work. We looked at a bunch of the major exits, and we tried to peel the onion back. Like, okay, fine. Like what was the keys to their successes? And we created this visual map. One of the insights we made is that it takes about 2.5 companies in general for one of these founders to create outsized return to that level. In general, we were doing arithmetics, right? So this isn't like, these are abstractions of reality, but in general, it was a 2.5 company formation before you can kind of hit big. And so the first time founders are real, like, Mark Zuckerberg is real. Sergey's real. These folks are real, and they're the first time founders.
So there's real data behind this concept of second time founder, or multiple founders of multiple companies. Okay.
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah.
so interesting.
So that's my way of answering your question, which is like when we're at Silicon Valley Bank, we're not just building the relationship with, in America, it's the sort of EIN, the sort of the employer identity number, right? The company's unique identification number. We don't just build the relationship with the EIN. We actually focus on also building a relationship with the SSN, the social security number, the person, not just the company, but the person. And part of it is because it's super easy for you to think that to focus on the when you think client experience, the client journey as the founder in this company. I think that's a very myopic way, and it's very short-sighted. The actual journey, you got to peel that onion back. Yes, it's the company, but it's really the founder. It's really the employee. It's really the engineer. She's the one that you really want to build that relationship with over the long run. Because if you believe in this repeat founder mentality, it's going to be that first company. They're going to learn some stuff. They're going to build a network. They're going to get the best of those folks to come on board, build that other company. They now have a little bit of success to go get tier one capital. That tier one capital comes on. They're smarter about how to build the right board. Now, all of a sudden, their probability of success increases in that second or third company formation.
But those repeat founders, I mean, if you built a company and sold it for $100 million, from a financial perspective, you're set for life. What makes them tick? Why is this guy or girl going back to build a second company, knowing it's very arduous and there's a high probability of not succeeding and almost undoing your initial success?
I get asked that, like, whether, from reporters all the time. Like, when I think, why do I have optimism that there's an enduring quality to the innovation economy? My simple answer is builders build. That's what they do. I don't think that so remember that some of the most successful companies were built during downturns.
Yes.
There's something wonderful about downturns, because 100%. If you're crazy enough,
it focuses your.
Oh my God. Like, you can't go spending random money in SG&A and building some ancillary orthogonal product and spending, time opening up an office in Miami. Like, there's focus. Like, go basically take all of the stuff that is dead weight on your ship, throw it overboard, and focus on the essence of your product. Become better general managers with better cash positions. And then, by the way, you're probably crazier than most because you still want to do it.
Yeah.
And so some of the greatest companies, the most enduring companies, are built during pain. And it's not like you walk in and you're just glutton for punishment as an entrepreneur. I think you're just so committed that you can't think about anything else to do but build this thing, whatever that thing is, because you feel it's missing in the world.
But there are also cases where it tips over and it becomes ego-driven. It becomes a little bit, and you've seen many of them in Silicon Valley, and many that have been in the press and so on. So I'm not going to go through names, but at what point, and it's a bit of a philosophical question here, but also, frankly, relates to a lot of the things also you did in your career and your life. Yeah. At what point does it become too much? And that becomes, those people, and I've seen it, they become unpleasant. It is no longer about building. It actually is about them only. This
is where I'm not going to absolve great entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and the environment I love dearly from the ills of things that we can create and the externalities, the negative externalities.
Lack of balance in many ways, Frank.
So I'm not absolving ourselves of being ethical, working through the governance process within the laws and doing things the right way. We've had cases where folks have done the wrong things, but that happens in any environment. And Silicon Valley is not above that. We need to always build a foundation of ethics to what we do. And absolutely. Now here's where I'd say, but what I actually sort of take a little bit of issue with is, wow, they went really rogue. They went really big. They went way bigger than they should have and all that good stuff. Remember, we're in the alternative investment asset class. In finance speakage, we're at the top right side of the efficient frontier. And that top right side is defined not just by return, but by variance.
Yeah.
And so
That's a very good point.
Risk.
Yeah, collateral damage is almost definitionally part of the game.
This is the necessary component of the asset class that you're in. So again, remember, I'm not saying, okay, so go do wrong things and do, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying those folks that are riding and, we call them the eccentrics that are running around University Ave and they're thinking about all these weird ideas and they're so meta and they're out of touch with reality. That's the asset class that's called good portfolio management. If you wanted them to be normal and doing all the stuff and suited up and driving the normal, the quote unquote normal cars and doing the non-techie stuff, that's called either a growth stock or a value stock. That's a dividend paying environment. That's not the asset class. In fact, these folks are doing what good portfolio management theory wants them to do, which is to co-vary with core, large cap, slow growth equity, which by the way, isn't bad.
It is obvious that you're trying to show off your stat 100, whatever the class that we took. And I recall very vividly that you didn't do so well. So I have a feeling that there's a little bit here of trying to show off that you did actually pay attention.
I'm proud of myself. I rehearsed that for years, waiting for this.
Especially when you threw in the word covariance. I mean, that because that wasn't a part of the class where, frankly, you were not paying attention. So it's good. It's good. Well, look, on that note, I have a concluding question for you that kind of relates to all of this and hopefully ties it in a bit. If we would go back now, and if you were starting today at college, if you were at Harvard today in your freshman or sophomore year, what would you advise a younger Ashraf? Would you still say, go do a combination of, economics and some maybe some, computer science classes? Or would you say, do whatever the hell you want? It actually doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's about your values and your work ethic, and you're going to figure it out. What would you advise that younger version of yourself?
I would say the kinder, gentler version of me would say, have some meta ideas of what you want your path to be, but don't overdo it. One of the things I tell entrepreneurs is, yes, luck will find you. Have enough cash in the bank for luck to have the highest probability of finding you. So there is a little bit of logic. And so for me, it's kind of the same thing as find some meta ideas of what needs to happen and have an enduring sense of where generally you want to be so that the right version of luck will find you. Luck is going to be there and it's going to need, but the type of luck that you need needs to kind of be structured around the path that you want to go to. So have some meta goal. I do think, the selfish part of me wants to say, but gosh, if you can do something in STEM, do it. I love this country. I love Cali. There's a lot of people right now that are hating on California. I'm a Jersey kid. I'm loyal to where I am. This state has been great to me. So I do have an affinity for this country that way. And I feel like, science, technology, engineering, and math is critically important for the success of the United States in the long term. Me and you both know the value of total factor productivity and what that does for an economy. And that's all innovation. That's all invention. And that I think for better or for worse is going to come from STEM. And so the more we can kind of intrinsically build a workforce of the future, we're going to need a lot more STEM, and we're going to need an elevated level of STEM graduates. I would try to push that Ashraf towards that for the better of the country.
Would you move to, you're graduating tomorrow morning, would you be taking a job with a hot startup, or would you be taking a job, because there's still that herd mentality with whatever the equivalent of the Goldman Sachs and the McKinsey's, if not, in fact, McKinsey and Goldman Sachs, they haven't changed that much. Because I think that's something a lot of these graduates that have that benefit and the privilege to choose are going through.
I've gotten the privilege of getting to know one of the most successful general partners, who happens to be also female in Silicon Valley, and her name is Teresa Gao. Just a luminary in the space, early Facebook, and doing amazing things now at Aspect Ventures. I asked her that question. She said, I would probably go with a Series B, C company in the private firm that has good tier one capital. And why did she say that? And now I really understand it. You're getting a lot of the value of a late stage scaled company. So you're not learning mistakes, but it's not so early that you're like pre-product market fit and you're learning a lot of hacky, spaghetti codey, shoot from the hip type stuff where there's no foundation of best practices for you to learn. You've got probably at that point some pretty seasoned general managers that are all stars, and you've got really enduring capital, so you don't have to worry probably about raising your C or D. She felt like that was the sweet spot. I kind of, from my experience, agree with her. It really is that perfect spot of getting both of the best of both worlds.
So for any budding students that or kids that are listening to this, hopefully they'll be listening. That's the path you'll choose. That's interesting. Because you started name dropping, I'm going to just say that Mo Salah came to the Lighthouse not twice but 3 times. Okay, since you opened that door, nothing trumps Mo Salah in our world. So just that you know. I want to put that on the record. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything we've said, but I felt the need to name drop.
I have no doubt in the world that you would beat the heck out of me in a name dropping competition.
Yeah. I was going to say Will Smith, by the way, but it's not. Will Smith is not the same cachet maybe he had a year ago. So I stuck with Mo Salah.
But jokes aside and non sequiturs aside, that's the other part that I think is an amazing time that we live in. The Mo Salahs of the world, the LeBron James of the world, the Steph Curry has a fund and he's doing really well. I think he's on fund too. Like these folks, by the way, a lot of the Warriors, the basketball players in Northern California, a lot of them actually, and I don't want to start rumors, but I've understood that many folks have come through the Warriors organization to actually also build their venture acumen.
Serena Williams. I mean, we just heard it last week. I mean, when you told me this idea, by the way, remember you talked to me about this a couple of years ago.
And so there's a fascinating time right now where also people are understanding that innovation is also a place to create, and creators now are coming from all spaces. Innovators it's becoming a sort of a place to congregate for singers and artists and musicians and athletes. And by the way, they have good capital. There's enough sophistication in the way we create cap tables today that their capital is deserving and has a necessary and desired place in the cap, in sort of the structure of a cap table. And on top of that, we actually now know how to exploit the knowledge that they have in a way that we could then manifest it into technological innovation. It's a wonderful time, and you're seeing that cross-pollination, which, by the way, is no surprise why LA is now the 3rd largest invested capital area in the United States. It's after California and New York. The dreamer economy of LA is really exciting now.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up because I think it's really important, as you also were giving some advice on a sort of younger Ashraf, for people to understand that it doesn't need to be that path only. If you are not interested in maths or sciences or engineering, it doesn't mean you can't find your path to not just succeed, but also monetize this in a way that is in full sync with starting your own fund or building something around it, etc. Those tools are being built. And I think that actually, to me, makes it a lot more fun, right? Sitting a little bit today, having been a banker for a long time and sitting a little bit more on the creative side of things now and looking at that intersection, it's really critically important that people understand it's not either or.
I mean, look at your own business, Hashem. I mean, are you a cafe F&B concept, or are you also a content creator who is also using F&B potentially? And I'm not saying that's what you're doing as a backdrop for a larger ethos about 100%. Recreating the concept of social culture with the backdrop being F&B and recreating the idea of the human experience that's both online and offline. This is what you're doing.
I appreciate that. I feel a lot better about myself now.
What is that, pure off-prem, or is that technology?
It's a mix. Well? It's a mix. No question about it. Just as a kind of concluding note, that fascinating and very interesting. It's exactly what you said. It's not offline. It's not online. It's a mix. And I have to constantly sit and say, which tool do you put in where? It's like a bit like a puzzle. And you're trying to build something, but you have to have, especially in that business I'm in, a longer term view, and you can't be short termist about it because these things don't build themselves quickly. But yeah, and really the main key was here for me personally, at least, was what we've just talked about, is that I felt I wanted to marry both those interests. I didn't want to be purely in the world of finance or technology, and I didn't want to be purely in the world of content creation either. I'm trying to find something in between, and that exists. You just have to find your own path.
Yep.
Ashraf, that's been fantastic conversation. I can't tell you, I feel like now my day is going to be very different than an hour and a half ago when we started. I think a lot of people will be very interested to hear your views and some of the wisdom you've imparted on us all. Thank you for doing this. Inshallah, in a couple of years, we're going to do this again, maybe even before, because I think the world around you is changing so fast that it probably requires second and hopefully third conversation. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, and I'm a big fan of what's going on in MENA and the type of entrepreneurs that are coming out of MENA. I'm even seeing ideas in the United States that actually started in MENA. I was actually on the phone with the founder, and a lot of his inspiration was from Katobi. So I'm starting to see that it is starting to build its own personality with its own innovation culture.
I think so.
I see great things coming for MENA.
That's great. Thanks, Ashraf.
All right.
Have a good rest of day. We'll speak very soon. All the best. Thank you.
All right.
You too. Take care. Bye. Thank you for joining us on the Lighthouse Conversations with me, Hashem Montasser, produced by Chirag Desai, and our content director is Farah Al-Sharif. You can connect with us on Instagram at @thelighthouse_AE and listen to all our previous episodes by visiting thelighthouse.ae/podcast. Or just press the follow button on your podcast player, whether it's Apple, Google, Spotify, or Anghami. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.